What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr., John Morantz, Joe Johnson's, Jaw Refs, of course. We've got Jays. We've got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
Well, back in 2020, you told me you wanted the equivalent of the Denver Nuggets in MLS. I gave you the Columbus Crew, and then the Nuggets became the best team in basketball, and the Crew proceeded to arguably be the best team in MLS twice and now have 2 trophies to show for it. It really is one of the more impressive pieces of analysis I've unintentionally ever given. But it's right up there with the best stuff I've ever done.
Yeah, gotta be. It's right up there with
Which
Frank
isn't
Mason,
saying all
Natty
that
Poi.
much.
It's got to be up there with
Right.
Frank Mason, Natty Poi.
Right. We're putting it on our Hall of Fame or on Mount Rushmore.
There you go. Columbus Crew, 2 of the last 4. The Nuggets, the defending world champs. And if you told me they won 3 of the next 5, I would not be all that surprised. So we went from a team that was probably a few steps away on both occasions to a team that, for one reason or another, are very well positioned in terms of kind of defining either the last 4 or 5 years of one league or potentially the next 5 years of another. So either way, I was in before they won a championship, and that's all that matters because I think I'm safe either way, regardless of if they were able to win one shortly after I joined the party or not. But it is pretty entertaining that not only did you give me a team that you thought was the correct description, they both ascended basically at the same time.
And they turned into what you didn't want.
Exactly.
Effectively. The Nuggets just got too good, and then the Crew matched the Nuggets. Very strange things.
At least it's not. It's at least it's not like I will never call anybody who's a Denver Nuggets fan a bandwagon.
No,
like,
no, definitely
never.
not. Yeah.
At least it's not the. At least you didn't say, "Hey, the Knicks," or "Hey, the Lakers." Like those two things, you're not going to get out of bandwagon fan no matter what.
Right.
The Nuggets, I think we can make it work.
Yeah. No. We don't do bandwagon fanning. Nope.
Josh, we are a little over a month into the college basketball season, a month and 5 days or so. We are in the darkest week of the entire college basketball season where all of the fun non-conference games have come to a screeching halt, except for Saturday. Saturday should be really fun. But we, for the most part, in the middle of the week for this particular week, we kind of run out of really fun games. And it's kind of a pause before we jump headfirst into conference schedules. We're about a week away from kind of the beginning of those things for a lot of different conferences. So it's a great time to kind of take a step back from the daily pods and look at the Power 6 conferences, the Big 6 conferences as a whole, and kind of reevaluate where how some of the things that we predicted, talked about preseason, have kind of come to fruition or not come to fruition, and kind of see where we went wrong and were led astray. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. Power 5 conferences and the Big East, and going to identify one thing that we've confirmed over the first month plus of the season, and then identify one thing that we were surprised by that is not playing out the way that we thought it would, and kind of take a big look, an overarching look at the 6 conferences before we jump into conference play. Josh, any questions, anything to add before we get into it?
I'm calling it surprises and validation.
Sure. I'm into that. I have no qualms with calling it surprises and validations. Would you like to go in alphabetical order, or would you like to go in order of the current KenPom conference rankings?
Let's go alphabetical. Just stay with tradition. You had me tempted, though.
Sure. Traditionally, we go alphabetical. That's generally how the structure of our preseason conference previews specifically. So we'll start there. We'll keep it. We'll keep the status quo and start alphabetical, and that will begin with the Atlantic Coast Conference. Ironically, the Atlantic Coast Conference is sixth among the power conferences, last among the power conferences at KemPom with a with a rating of 11.34 over a full rating point behind number 5, which is the Pac-12. But starting with the ACC, Josh, please a validation, something that you've confirmed over the first month or so of the season.
Syracuse is at least interesting.
Mm.
I had a little bit of a difficult time coming up with this one, but I did say on our preview, there are worse places to start from a roster standpoint than where Adrian Autry is starting.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to Tennessee and Gonzaga and Hawaii, and they lost at Virginia. They beat LSU and Georgetown. Okay. Not terrific wins, obviously. They have 0 true marquee wins, but they've beaten all the teams they're supposed to. We just don't know what they look like against teams that aren't, arguably top 10 in the country and aren't worse than Syracuse. So it's this question of, are they kind of a bubble team? Are they a bubble team, or are they on the right side of the bubble? We don't know that yet, but we're in the spot I thought would be, which is this team is actually pretty good, and they might do something this season, which is not something you would necessarily expect in this kind of transition from one of the staples of the sport, where people are transferring all the time. The roster looks different, but this team has real talent, and I feel like that has been proven and verified so far.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a team that I will agree with that statement for most of the season, and they won't have any chance to make the tournament because they haven't been especially competitive against any of the good teams that they've played. And maybe they'll do like a Clemson type thing from last year and kind of get hot early in ACC play, and as a result be in the mix. That wouldn't like totally stun me, but they are for the most part convincing against some of, and even the in the ballpark of top 100 or worse high major teams. Like they handled LSU 80-57, they handled Georgetown 80-68 on the road. So it might just be one of those things where they don't put together enough quality wins in the ACC to really knock on the door of the NCAA tournament, but we can also feel like we are in moving in the right directions. 118th at KemPom last year. They're 95th right now. They started at 105, so have moved in the right direction. Fell all the way to 127 after what they did in Maui against Tennessee and Gonzaga, kind of getting handled in those two games, but back up inside the top 100. And of course, it's different. It's going to take some time, but I think you were right heading into the season that there are some intriguing names on that roster that I like at some point they're going to beat a team on a random Wednesday that they probably shouldn't beat because they play really well on the right night.
They're going to have to win a lot of ACC games. That is a fair point. They might be able to, though, is kind of what I'm getting at here, that you do have some teams in the ACC, like an LSU and a Georgetown, and they've looked pretty convincing against them. The question is, can you hang with the Dukes? Can you hang with the North Carolinas of the world? Get a couple signature wins because, they don't have any right now. And
they lost by 22 to the only ACC team they've played thus far, and that was Virginia. So
they haven't come close. Yeah,
you're right. I like that. I'm into that. I think the thing that's validated for me, and I kind of pondered this a little bit when we talked to Brendan Marks ahead of the season, but I think we're validated in the idea that the ACC is still searching for that. What does the next era of ACC basketball look like, and where can we get our elite? Will we ever find ourselves back into this spot of in the conversation for one or two or three best conferences in America, kind of that classic ACC basketball feel? And coming into the season, I thought it was unlikely that we'd find that this year, and that's pretty clearly the case. thus far. Even the team that was supposed to be your kind of elite banner team this year in Duke is has not played especially well. They lost their one and only ACC game thus far, but lose to an Arkansas team, and that game gets worse and worse pretty much every time Arkansas steps on the floor. They have a win against Duke on their resume on December 12th and weren't in Joe Lunardi's bracket as an SEC team that started as a top 25 team on December 12th. That's pretty impressive to do. So that team that was, I don't really care about Duke carrying the ACC metrics wise, but Duke clearly not the elite team we thought they were going to be. And they have a lot of fine teams, right? They have a lot of just like average to good high major basketball teams, but I think we're still searching for that kind of vintage level of ACC, and there isn't something I've seen thus far that suggests this is going to be the year that we kind of return to it.
And while North Carolina is clearly very good and exponentially improved, nobody's out here thinking they're the best team in the country. Right? Duke was supposed to be the team with this kind of North Carolina coming in behind, where you go, okay, now we're on to something with what Clemson's doing. Virginia's off to a decent start. Then you might be talking. But having this North Carolina team have to carry the conference is not where you want to be if you're the ACC. Absolutely.
What surprised you?
Didn't have to go too deep on this one. Duke, but specifically just that the players who were supposed to be much better haven't been. I mean, Tyrese Proctor's numbers are very, very similar. Filipowski's and Roach's are up a little bit, but we're not talking about 5 point a game increases here, right? They haven't done the things that take Filipowski from an ACC Player of the Year candidate to a National Player of the Year candidate, or Tyrese Proctor from a role player to an All-American candidate. Jared McCain is shooting 37.5% on 2-pointers. His 3-point shooting looks really good. He just is struggling to make anything outside of threes. And you only have six
He's made
players
more
averaging,
threes than twos this year.
Yeah. You only have 6 players averaging more than 3.3 points per game. Partially because of limited minutes, limited opportunities. But I really thought we were going to get more improvement from the big three and more like 7 or 8 reliable contributors. And neither of those things have happened.
Yeah, this is the obvious place to go here. And it's not, it's one thing to, like, for example, I don't think Kansas is the best team in the country, and I don't see anybody like fighting right now to declare Kansas the best team in the country. At least I haven't seen. But Kansas went from the best team in the country to still a team that kind of bouncing around the top 5, they're top 10 at KenPom. All of these things, like, they're not really not like Duke is not as advertised.
Right. Kansas lost to Purdue.
Right. And like there's some very real, like Kansas is 32nd
Yes.
offensively in KenPom, and they started like 3rd or something. So clearly there are some limitations there, but it's not resulting in them not even being in that conversation.
Right.
Duke is just kind of ejected from that conversation completely. And it's one thing to not be the number 1 team in the country when you're come in number 1 AP poll preseason, and you kind of end up bouncing around somewhere between 3 and 7 or whatever. That's not what has happened here at Duke. And the other thing here for me is I'm not totally sure what there is for me to believe that there's going to be this big renaissance for Duke this season. And it's not like there's this one thing that I feel like I can count on to flip in terms of a switch at some point and really change what the product on the floor is for Duke. Like, it's pretty simple. Like, these guys, like certain guys just need to play better and for them to be the team that they were supposed to be. And like, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but the answer is pretty clear what needs to happen for Duke, and I'm not totally sure it's going to happen. It's very surprising.
Yeah, maybe the biggest surprise of the year so far.
Absolutely. Second, in alphabetical order, would be the Big Ten. Is that right? Is that how this usually goes?
I think we do the numbers first.
Okay. Well, then let's go to the Big Ten. The Big Ten, led by in conference, by the way, the 2-0 Indiana Hoosiers. Did you see somebody got mad on Twitter at Joe Lenardi today because the automatic qualifier on his, he designates an
Yeah,
automatic qualifier from each conference. And because Indiana was, even though Purdue was like a number one seed,
yeah,
the automatic qualifier was Indiana because it just defaults to whoever's at the top of the conference. And
right.
right now, Indiana, because of schedule, is the only team to have played 2 conference games and win both of them. So they are technically the automatic qualifier. But so right now at the top of Ken Palm's conference rankings, Indiana you'll see first, but that's the team 76 at Ken Palm. Of course, it's the Purdue Boilermakers, number 3, 9-1 overall with a loss to Northwestern. But pretty much as advertised, Zach Edey absolutely, Zach Edey is causing controversy. He's so good. Apparently, there are conspiracy theories about the foul calls against Zach Edey. Not really, by the way.
Naturally.
But Boilermakers as advertised. What else has been validated? Maybe it's that, but what else has been validated for you out of the Big Ten?
I think I said last season, Ohio State has good players. They just weren't a good basketball team. Well, now they're a good basketball team. They're 27th in KenPom, 8-2. Not world beaters. It's not like they have. I mean, that Alabama loss isn't, or that Alabama win isn't getting any better at the moment. But this looks like a Chris Holtmann team that is going to be a difficult out, that's going to win a lot of Big Ten games. This to me looks like a team more reflective of the talent that is on that roster than whatever in the world happened last season. That was one of the most confusing things in the sport to me, is why they were so bad. And I feel like they are proving me right in that.
Shouts to the Buckeyes. What'd you say? 27th at KenPom right now?
Yes.
8-2. Losses Texas A&M and then Penn State. Hopefully we go in a different direction than we went last year, because this is a team that finished 16-19 last year. A darling of KenPom, by the way, a 16-19 team, 49th at KenPom, a KenPom darling. But this is a team that on December 29th was 9-3, with a win over Cincinnati, a win over Texas Tech, a pretty close loss to Duke on the road, and they took North Carolina to overtime.
Oh, they did play really well in that Duke game. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it kind of fell off the rails, and they started, fine. They were 2-0 in the Big Ten, and then they went on a 5-game losing streak. They only won 1 game between a win at Northwestern on January 1st and a win at home against Illinois on February 26th. They won once in that stretch. A home win over Iowa. So, eerily, actually, like, pretty similar. They were heading into that Northwestern game on New Year's Day. They were 13th at KenPom. They're 27th right now. So hopefully that we can parlay this solid start with at least one respectable win into a better non-conference, Big Ten conference performance. Josh, life after Trace Jackson Davis is hard. And we have validated that life after Trace Jackson Davis is hard. The Indiana Hoosiers are 7-2. They've dropped from 50th to 76th at KenPom. They have, I am truly surprised that they managed to get out of their first 3 games against FGCU, Army, and Wright State without a loss. Like, they tried really hard in those first 3 games. They've gotten absolutely mopped by the two good teams that they've played. Connecticut beat them 77-57. Auburn beat them 104-76. They are 2-0. They got to beat a Maryland team that's nowhere near as good as we thought they were going to be. And they beat a Michigan team on the road 78-75, just narrowly escaped a loss to Louisville, which is something that not many teams will be able to say this year, that they narrowly escaped a loss. They will. Lots of teams will escape with a wide margin against Louisville this year. Better believe that. Yeah, life is just hard. It's really hard when there's an influx of talent. Sure, Kellel Ware is still very much an NBA draft prospect. Mackenzie Mbako, we're working on it. 21 of 21 from the free throw line, sure. But he's off to a slow start. There are still times that I don't totally feel like things make sense on the court for Indiana. So life is just tough. They're 334th in the country in 3-point field goal percentage. And when you don't have Trace Jackson Davis, that's the kind of thing that needs to go up for things to be easy offensively. And they just haven't been. We'll see how they play Kansas on Saturday. We'll see how that goes. But ultimately, Ken Pom has them projected to finish 17-14 and 9-11 in conference. Not where you were hoping to be if you were the Hoosiers when they hired Mike Woodson after the 2020-21 season. You just wish that we had some more momentum than that, but life is hard without Trace Jackson Davis, and that's not something that you can quantify until you actually get on the floor and it's against a different team.
Yeah, and it's interesting to try and separate his impact from just the trajectory of the program, because there were so many positive things happening from the dark place Indiana was in that it was easy to just look at it as general progress.
Mm-hmm.
And now the question is, okay, how much of that really was Trace Jackson Davis? And
that just so happened to be one of the, and I have no idea actually, so nobody from Indiana actually jumped down my throat, but like one of the 5 best Indiana players like of the last 30 years. If not, like we could talk program history. Like there is, like he was very, very good. And that's definitely an interesting question. How much of that was he responsible for relative to everything else that was going on in Bloomington?
Right. And every game they play without him, we get to draw a better conclusion there. Obviously, we'll never know for sure because they were intertwined. But early indications are that he had a lot to do with it.
Life is hard without Trace Jackson Davis. What have you been surprised by here?
Honorable mention to Maryland. Even after the James Madison loss, I was convinced Michigan State was going to be fine. I was not surprised that Michigan State got off to a poor start. This is what happens when they play a bunch of tough games and they're just not, for whatever reason, not ready at the beginning of the season. That's fine. Thomas has made a living out of it. He's earned his reputation off of it. They are 4-5 after 2 Big Ten games, 0-2 in conference, by the way. That if they are serious about being good, they should have won. Wisconsin's a good basketball team. You should be beating them at home.
Yeah.
And you should be beating Nebraska. I thought this was growing pains. It is not. And we don't need to go in depth because we've talked about this multiple times before. Until something changes, they are just last season's team. And that team was not very good. And they're playing a more difficult schedule. Well, I don't actually know if that's true off the top of my head, but they might actually be, I'd argue they're worse because AJ Hoggard hasn't been very good. They are even more reliant on Tyson Walker. We've talked about this a bunch. I did not think it would look anywhere. I expected them to not look like a top 5 team in the country from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Never in a million years did I think we'd be talking about 4-5.
It's like an ugly 4-5.
Yeah.
It's not like Tennessee's 4-3 because they were the unfortunate team that had to lose twice in Maui.
And have played a couple other really good teams too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not that.
Right. These are avoidable losses that should not have happened for the most part.
It's yeah, this isn't quite the same as Duke, but it's similar-ish, and a lot of the things that were supposed to elevate them just haven't happened. And there's been a lot of people comparing this Michigan State team to last year's UNC team, which is interesting and has some interesting conversations in terms of what they were what they could be, and then specifically taking away a stretch four that unlocked as many things as Brady Manick did, and how
And
important Joey
Joey
Hauser
Hauser,
actually ended up
yeah.
being, and kind of the trickle down effect of what not having that guy meant.
Okay, I'll buy that because there's a very important difference.
What being the Final Four run?
Yes.
Sure.
That there was something to, as much as I didn't cling on to it, there was something to point to about North Carolina. This Michigan State team, okay, now, I mean, they came pretty close to making the Final Four, relatively speaking. But they were fine. And you've been even more insistent about that than I was. That is an interesting stretch four conversation, though. That I had not really put into conversation. I'll buy that. There's something there.
This team was never going to be any good if their freshmen weren't any good.
Right.
And their freshmen haven't been any good. And now Tom Izzo is talking about the possibility of, he's got Xavier Booker on his roster getting DNPs, coach's decision, and talking about his son possibly getting minutes at center. So like we can't have a serious conversation about like Michigan State ceiling when, and like that was always going to be the thing. Like if they were going to be a top 5 team in the country, it was going to have to do like the guys coming back weren't going to take that big of a jump.
Right. That's the other difference. North Carolina, it was about the guys coming back. Michigan State, it was about the combination of what was coming back and what could be.
So this is clearly the surprise. And right, like you said, as you pointed out astutely, did they need to be a top 5 team? Like that wouldn't have stunned me if they weren't a top 5 team, but being just just a poor basketball team. Like there's no other way to put it. They are poor. It is not a good basketball team. That's really not something I thought I would be saying, especially on December 12th.
They got to pull it together quickly. I mean, they still can, but they're running out of time.
Big 12. Death, taxes, and the Big 12 is the best conference in America. That's the case again. This year, they are responsible for 6 of the top 19 KenPom teams. That's pretty impressive. That's just under a third of the teams. And they add, like 8 more, 4 more inside the top 50. Every team except one, being West Virginia, is inside the top 100. And all but 3 are inside the top 45. What have you been validated by when it comes to the Big 12?
I feel like I nailed Kansas.
I think you did.
I said from the beginning, they're not the best team in the country. They're going to be really good, but not as good as people think. That's basically where they are. I did expect them to probably lose one more of these games in this really difficult stretch of non-conference. So give them credit for that. Because that was part of my theory about them potentially not getting a 1 seed, is that they would have come out looking worse than they have right now, because they're going to have that resume again where you just go, oh, look at that. They've won, 28, 29, 30 games. Look at the strength of the schedule. They're going to get a 1 seed because they've played a really difficult schedule and won an awful lot of games. They're still in position to do that. But there was a little bit too much excitement. And as I've mentioned before, this idea that all those pieces just added on top of each other. There were some things that get taken away because of the way they're playing now too, and the way they have to implement all these new pieces, and the fact that they're just not getting some of the help that they expected as well is factoring into this too. As you mentioned before, nobody's talking about them as the best team in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you hit it I think you hit it on the head. I think we've kind of we've identified part of that reason as, in years past, DeJuan Harris has had the luxury of just being the guy who is a really awesome on ball defender, a great just like leader on the floor, pass the ball, not make a bunch of mistakes. And this year, that offense is just going to need him to do what he did. Who was that against? Was that against Kentucky, right? In the
I think
Champions
so.
Classic, where he made like 7 of 9 threes. The last time I checked, he had more points in that game than the other games he had played combined. That was like a week and a half ago, though. So I'm sure that's not the case anymore. But the point is still the same, that that on some nights they're just not going to have enough when it's only Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough, and oftentimes KJ Adams adding another 9 to 12 points, kind of in that ballpark. But against good teams on most nights, that's probably not going to be enough for them to really handle teams. You saw them only score 59 points against Marquette, but on in the same breath, they have wins over UConn and Tennessee and Kentucky already. So clearly a team that is putting together a resume worthy of a number 1 seed, but kind of falling into that spot where I don't see a ton of people saying, okay, the Jayhawks are the best team in the country. With that being said, and I think one of the things I've been validated by is that it is we're going to get to Big 12 play, and Kansas, the conversation of Kansas being the best team in the Big 12 and really being like a co-favorite or right there is something that we're probably going to be talking about. Like the idea of heading into conference play and being skeptical of the Cougars was not something I would have expected. And they've done nothing but ascend to the number 1 team at KenPom. They're 10-0. Having wins that are like a few solid ones, but nothing that really jumps off the page. They're going to play Texas A&M on Saturday. That will be a nice litmus test for where Kelvin Sampson's team is. But I thought Houston would come in and pretty immediately be a factor in just the conversation of who's going to win this conference. And we are 10 games in, we're a month plus, and they've done nothing but pretty much steamroll almost everybody they've played and look primed to make a run at a Big 12 title in their first year in the conference.
That goes nicely with my surprise. So is it okay if I jump over?
Absolutely.
Not specifically Baylor, or sorry, Houston. Houston is the least surprising of all of these things I'm going to talk about. But what I am surprised by is that the depth might actually be there. I was very much thinking this is not going to look of course the Big 12 is going to be really good, but that it was not going to look and feel the same. Because of the teams that got added, because you were looking at 2 teams you felt really good about in Houston and Kansas, and that was it. Everybody else had some question marks. Well, here we go. Baylor is back to being Baylor. Houston is doing exactly what you expect. Kansas is just fine. And then Oklahoma, BYU, and Cincinnati are a combined 24-2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care who they have or haven't played. They are 24-2. That is
BYU slotting right into that. Oh, we're just gonna send to a top 10 KenPom team like all the other Big 12 teams do. Like we're just gonna join the conference and fit right in.
Right.
Yeah.
UCF is the only one who really hasn't helped yet, and that was as to be expected.
And they're 75th. It's not like the 2 teams the 2 teams that are at the very bottom of this conference and the one in the cellar in terms of KenPom and advanced ratings is Oklahoma State and West Virginia.
Yeah.
Those are 2 teams that are there
already.
Those
are the 2 worst teams in the conference. Yeah.
So,
at least so far.
Yeah. I mean, that's, UCF is at 75 is going to be way better than most conferences, everybody else's worst team. So at least from that perspective, if there's anybody dragging the Big 12 down right now, it's not the new teams in the Big 12.
Right. And so it's not just we have a couple really good teams and a bunch of good ones. You've got 3 Final Four caliber teams and some other ones who are off to. We're going to have to see how good they are and whether they can keep it up. It's not like Oklahoma has been beating top teams here. But the records matter at this point, and they're in a position where they could have 5, 6, 7 really good teams, and the bottom of the conference, if Oklahoma State and West Virginia pull it together a little bit, could be about where it is normally. And Iowa State's been pretty good. You can go down the list. Kansas State's been decent. I am surprised. I did not think the Big 12 was going to look this strong.
This is spot on. It's somehow taken the depth or just the total number of teams and used it to increase their depth rather than it be something that threatens their depth. And we'll see what that ends up meaning at the end of conference play, but so far, I mean, continues to be the best conference in the country, and at least this season, and this season being the only year that we're going to have this version of the Big 12, it's at least not going to be this year that changes the way we talk about the depth and the night in, night out grind that is the Big 12.
Mm-hmm. And the other part of this too is there are only so many non-conference games left.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They can't hurt each other that much if they're beating each other. From a conference standpoint, you got to do your work in non-conference so that you have the reputation so that when you beat Oklahoma, it's a good win, or when you lose to Oklahoma, it's not a bad loss.
Right.
And they've pretty much already achieved it unless something catastrophic happens here before they get into Big 12 play.
Yeah. Like, unless things go horribly wrong on Saturday,
right,
then this is going to be the best conference in the country at KenPom again.
Yeah.
And it's not particularly close. The gap between the Big 12 and the SEC at 2 is like bigger than the gap, or just as big as the gap from 2 to 6.
As it should be.
It's not particularly close at all, which is not something I was expecting, especially based on where we started with KenPom, and that was with the SEC being the best conference preseason at KenPom. At least I'm pretty sure that's how it was. But they have not missed a stride in very Big 12 fashion.
Mm-hmm.
The Big East. What you got for me? What's been surprising, validating through the first month with the Big East?
I'll keep my validation pretty brief. The top 3 are that good. 25-4, no bad losses. Still believe Marquette's one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country. Don't have concerns about the other 2. Creighton's loss that was a head scratcher is not looking like such. I know Colorado State hasn't been perfect now since, but not exactly as much of a head scratcher now with what Colorado State has done.
And it's clearly an outlier. Like, it's not one of those things that had like underlying, like, okay, this might be something we need to watch out for. Right. It was just like a night from hell kind of thing.
And a team that was able to take advantage of it on the other side.
Sure. Yeah. But it's not like, oftentimes it's like, oh, Tennessee only scored 45 points. Like, what does this mean? Like, Creighton having the stinker that they did shouldn't mean anything other than they had a stinker on that particular night.
Yeah. To me, it's still the best three teams out of any conference, even the Big 12. Now, the difference is the depth behind it, but that is my validation. We were both very high on all 3 of these teams. I was especially high on Marquette. I feel correct in all of that.
Yeah, not only are they clearly that good, like they actually do have like 3 of the best 8 teams in the country, best 7 teams in the country. Yeah. And that's where we thought they were going to be. And it's not like they're 3 of the top 11 and they're clearly separating themselves from the rest of the Big East. They have their 4, 5, 6 at KenPom right now, and that matches the eye test. And at different points this season, maybe not with Creighton necessarily, but at different points this season, I've thought, man, Marquette might be the best team in the country. UConn might be the best team in the country. That's definitely as advertised for this conference. What surprises you?
How bad the rest of the conference has been?
Yeah, I described it as, I'm surprised that the middle of the conference is a gauntlet because everybody's really mid and average, not because there are like 4 or 5 like quality teams here.
Yeah. Now,
like Butler might be like the 4th or 5th team in the power rankings, and Butler like has done Like they beat Texas
That
Tech at
is not
home
a
in overtime.
compliment.
Yeah, that's not a
Right.
like Butler, a team that finished under 500 last year, was higher in the net rankings on December 12th last year than they are this year, and had a win over Kansas State. So like, this is like, shouts to my Butler Bulldogs, of course,
They are a
but
much better basketball team.
it's a better basketball team for sure. But they were supposed to be a better basketball team than people thought, and go from like 9th in the conference to like 7th in the conference, not being in the conversation for like the 4th. And from a record perspective, they're 4th, 5th right there with Providence, because nobody else's record is all that impressive at all.
Right. Providence has been fine. They got
Providence
the win
has been about as advertised for me.
Got nothing to hurt them. They're going to be in the NCAA tournament conversation. The
Cam
win over
English is a good
Wisconsin helped.
coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're doing just fine. That's not the concern here. And having Butler have a good start helps with all these high major wins, even if they're not against the best teams from those conferences. The problem is the St. John's has done very little to be impressive. Villanova can lose to any team in the country on any given night, and Xavier has just been flat out terrible.
I can't believe I talked myself into St. John's. I can't believe I did it, Josh. There are a few things I've been more steadfast with on this podcast the last 6 years than show me St. John's, and then I'll believe you.
Now, what did we say though? We said, I feel like we're both on the same point. If anybody can fix it, it's Rick Pitino. Maybe we were a little bit too gracious there. It's not like they've been awful. They just haven't. They don't look like oh my goodness, here they come.
And they don't look like a team that's convinced me in any way, shape, or form that they're going to put together like a conference performance that ends up with them winning 12 times.
Right.
Like they might, because they beat up, like, because they're still probably better than some of these other teams at the bottom, but like, it's not the team that could threaten to win like 13 or 14 games that people were trying to convince me that they were. And honestly, that I was starting to believe just a little bit.
Yeah. The whole moral of the story here is that those 3 teams are going to win an awful lot of conference games.
They are. You might one of those 3 teams might have to win like 17 conference games to win this thing outright.
Because how many games actually scare you? At Villanova?
No. At Villanova right now does not scare me.
Well, Villanova's going to beat you if they shoot 42% from 3.
Sure.
But you're also going to beat Villanova if they shoot 32% from 3. So that's my point, though, is that you're taking kind of a game of chance as your scariest road game outside of the other 2.
Yeah, that is. It's the makeup of the conference is still the same. It's still these 3 teams at the top. We thought there was a chance that Villanova could be number 4. They're just not.
We got that one wrong.
And I still have no idea what's going on in the middle of the conference. And it's just not in the same way that I thought I wasn't going to know what's going on in the middle of the conference. Still, there are like 5 teams that can finish 4th. I just don't have any idea which one it is. And it's not because they're all like really good. It's because they all have been pretty uninspiring. They have, right now 4, 5, 6 at KenPom. Villanova is still top 30. And then you drop all the way to 46. And I find it a little bit hard to believe that Xavier has managed to maintain their spot inside the top 50 at 5-5 with losses to Washington, Oakland, and Delaware. But I'll let Ken Pomeroy worry about that.
Some of those at home.
Yes.
I believe at least Oakland was at home.
And Delaware.
And I would say Delaware
and Washington,
right?
and Washington was on a neutral. So they don't even get the road loss.
Yeah.
It might have been somewhere in Washington, though. No, it was in Vegas, right? That's where T-Mobile Arena is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in Vegas.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that KenPom ranking right now.
Perfect.
I got
that. Anything else on the Big East?
Let's jump to the SEC. Sorry.
The SEC. No, not the SEC. The Pac-12.
I always do that.
The Pac-12. Don't forget about the Pac-12. The Pac-12 has the number 1 team in the country, the 8-0 Arizona Wildcats. They are number 2 at KenPom. They beat the brakes off of Wisconsin in their most recent game. They get probably the game of the year thus far on Saturday, that being against Purdue. that should be an absolute blast. That game at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. Shouts to the Circle City. What say you about the Pac-12? Where have you been validated? What has surprised you thus far here in 2023?
I'll just throw mine both out there if that's okay.
I would love that, Josh.
Because it's pretty black. It's pretty black and white and cut and dry here. I was correct about trusting the past and not believing things were going to change. Continuing the St. John's conversation. Everybody got all excited about USC. They're losing to teams they shouldn't lose to. They've been okay, underwhelming. They're just not great. Oregon, I kept saying I don't know how Colorado is behind them in the Pac-12 media preseason poll. I feel vindicated in that. They've been fine. I know the injuries are part of it. And Stanford, every year you go, well, on paper, they've got enough talent to make the NCAA tournament. This might be the year. And yeah, that's the thing I got right is I picked those three teams in particular, but just not believing this year is going to be any different because it's playing out very similar to years in the past. What I got wrong, Arizona's ceiling. I did not think they were going to be anything more than a top 10 team. I picked them to win the conference because I didn't trust anybody else.
Sure.
Which is the part of it I got right. The part of it I got wrong was I did not expect them to be a factor in the national conversation in a real way outside of they're a high major conference champion. And yeah, they've already achieved that part by, taking over the first 2 months of the season.
I feel validated in the sense of there's something in the water in Eugene, Oregon right now. There's just something in the water. I don't know what's going on with Dana Altman's Ducks, but the injury bug is there over and over and over again. It's now a team projected to go 11-9 in the Pac-12, and despite the fact that they employ the services of a 6-foot freshman from Westland, Oregon, and the last time that they did that, it worked out pretty well by a young man by the name of Peyton Pritchard. Jackson Shelsted. Say that 5 times fast, by the way. Jackson. I can't say it once. Jackson Shelsted. Yeah. He's shooting the ball well. 7 of 15 from the 3-point line. Sure thing. But he's not Peyton Pritchard. I'm a little bit disappointed. I'll table that for now. But Oregon, they're 6-2 with a loss to Santa Clara and Alabama on a neutral floor. There's just, they beat a Michigan team that's like bad at home in overtime. Probably shouldn't take you that many minutes to beat Michigan at home right now. They played Georgia open the season and we're better than Georgia, but that game wasn't in question. Mm-hmm. That game was kind of back and forth for part of the game. And I just and I know that the Pac-12 is going away, but a part of the reason that the Pac-12 has been so forgettable for me the past few years is because of the lack of Oregon's presence as one of the top dogs in the conference. It's, you think back to those years where, Oregon's a 3 seed, Arizona's a 2 seed, UCLA's a 3 seed, Utah's, excuse
6
me,
seed.
Right. And it's just something's missing there when Oregon isn't one of the top teams in the conference. And they're just again, this year, it doesn't really seem to be their fault. Nate Biddle and Volley Dante, they're both dealing with injuries already. They have a backcourt that just is never going to be optimal. It's just a bunch of guys that kind of feel like they all do the same thing. And it's, I don't know, it's tough. It'd have been fun if Oregon would have really been a crucial part of the top of this conference. And maybe they will. But at this point, not only is Arizona run away with who I think is the top dog in this conference, there hasn't been anybody kind of reslot themselves in at the expense of USC. UCLA has been pretty forgettable as well. Loses to a Villanova team that's I didn't think they were going to lose to. They've now lost 3 close games to the good teams that they've played, but have still lost them. And
can we talk about that game for a second?
The Villanova game? Sure.
Did you see what Mick Cronin said?
I heard something about what Mick Cronin said, yeah.
Mick Cronin managed to throw ricochet shots at his own players by criticizing Villanova's, in a move I have never seen from a coach before.
Interesting decision, for sure.
He said, I mean, he's sitting there looking at the box score. He goes, Eric Dixon had 10 rebounds tonight. Eric Dixon's not a good athlete. And then it's Jermaine Burton, right? I continue to forget his first name. Transfer from Richmond.
No, Tyler.
Tyler, thank you. Yes. And they said, Burton played 4 years at Richmond. We can't get rebounds. So he criticized Eric Dixon and Tyler Burton as a means to criticize his own players by saying, you have to be better than these guys. It's Villanova, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
I understand Tyler Burton hasn't been there very long. But Eric Dixon's been a fine Big East player. Bizarre.
Eric Dixon's been a very good Big East player.
Yeah.
That's an interesting decision by Mick there. Interesting. Anything else on the Pac-12 here?
Nope. Just wanted to get that out there.
Let's wrap it up with the SEC, the Southeastern Conference. Tennessee 6-3. We talked about them a little bit. That 6-3, still 9th at KenPom. Their losses are Purdue by 4, Kansas by 9, and North Carolina by 8 in one of North Carolina's best offensive performances of the last decade. Certainly nothing. They just got a quality win at home against Illinois. They are 9th at KenPom, still two other teams inside the top 15 at KenPom, that being Auburn and Alabama. What have you confirmed thus far when it comes to those playing in the southeast corner of the United States?
We're just going to take it a completely different direction. I kind of like to talk about the teams that I said had a lot of talent.
Mm-hmm.
The one in the SEC was Ole Miss. I think we both kind of said there's enough talent here. However you feel about Chris Beard, don't bet against him as a coach.
Mm-hmm. I had them as my most intriguing team.
Yeah. You absolutely could claim this one as your validation as well. They beat Memphis, UCF, and NC State. Now, they've managed to drop in KenPom because they had a bunch of really close wins against teams they should have probably beaten by more. However,
they beat Detroit Mercy, Sam Houston State, and Temple by a combined 5 points.
Yeah, it is truly impressive how many close games they played at the beginning.
Yeah. And they only beat Mount St. Mary's by 9.
Yeah. I would care a lot more if this wasn't a new coach and you weren't bringing in some new players.
Mm-hmm.
That this team just is not used to Chris Beard and hasn't been around each other that much. So if it takes a little bit longer to figure out how to play together and to hit your stride, picking up a bunch of wins along the way isn't the worst thing in the world.
Not at all.
I'm still in on this team. I expect this to carry over into SEC play. It's not like they're struggling against the best teams they're playing on their schedule. Again, it's not like these are the best teams in the country. But I will give them a pass on some shaky performances against teams they should have handled because they have risen to the occasion with the best teams they've played. I expect that to continue to be the case once we get to conference play.
Trivia time. What's Reed Shepherd's 3-point shooting percentage right now?
42%?
59%.
Really?
He is 23 of 39. What's more ridiculous, that he's 23 of 39 or is that he's 7th in the country? That there are 6 players shooting better than he is. That's crazy.
Yeah, I'll go with the latter.
That's insane. I might have to look up who's ahead of him while you're talking next. But my validation is that Kentucky, this was the team I was the most excited for, and they are a circus and a train wreck at times and terrifying at times, and obviously all like under the legal drinking age by like 11 years. And they are just fascinating to try and figure out. There'll be times where they look like the better team on the floor against Kansas, and then they'll turn around and lose to UNC Wilmington at home. They'll beat Miami, Florida by 22. They'll need overtime to beat St. Joseph's. It is an absolute zoo in Lexington right now, and it is exactly what I was hoping for. And it looks like a team that has a bunch of freshmen on it, and you have no idea which version of those freshmen, apart from National Player of the Year Reed Shepherd, you're not sure what version you're going to get on any given night. It's truly a treat, and I am completely validated by their performance thus far.
There you go.
And if we get to, and I said, and like, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be. They could lose to like Louisville and Illinois State in back-to-back games. I wouldn't be stunned. And at the end of the year, if you told me that like everyone's terrified of them and they're a trendy pick to go to the Elite Eight, I wouldn't be surprised by that either.
Oh yeah, I still am very much holding out for the possibility that it's a Final Four team. I have not dropped my confidence in their ceiling one bit. The question is whether they're ever going to reach that ceiling. That's where my confidence has dropped.
Correct. So I think they're fascinating and very validated by that heading into the season. What surprised you?
The A teams.
Okay, all right. Listen to me. Why is Ken Pomeroy? Because according to the NCAA men's basketball stats page, Reed Shepherd is number 1 in the country in 3-point shooting percentage. So I don't understand here, Ken Pomeroy. How is he 7th on your site? Maybe there are 6 guys that
not qualified.
Yeah, I guess.
But you also explain how you're shooting 60+% from 3.
So here's your yeah. Now there are 8 guys in the country shooting 50% or better. Isaac McNeely at Virginia is 25 of 43 from the 3-point line. Tip it. Trent Brown, Southern Illinois. One Kylan Boswell from Arizona. 21 of 40.
Proposition.
21 of 40 from the 3-point line. That's a man right there. Wooga Poplar, Miami, 23 of 44. Sam Griffin, Wyoming. Mark Sears, which has to have a lot to do with the performance he put together against Purdue a couple days ago. But there you go. There's the top 5. According to the NCAA.com, Reed Shepherd, number 1 in the country. Anyways, what surprises you about the SEC?
The A teams.
The A teams.
Yeah, Alabama and Arkansas.
Oh, like not the A list teams, like not the teams at the top of the A teams.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
At least they're playing people. I mean, their signature wins are Duke and Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
So really what this is what I am most shocked by is their absolute inability to beat really good teams. Either because Duke excused themselves from that conversation or because Alabama shoots the lights out in the first half and then Purdue comes back and takes care of business. Because both of these teams, now Alabama more in the regular season, Arkansas more in the NCAA tournament, but they've been 2 of those teams, right, where awful talented, it doesn't necessarily come together for a consistent season, although Alabama had a very consistent one last year. But even when they're not the Alabama of last season, on any given day, they can go beat anybody in the country. And they just don't look like they can beat anybody in the country right now. That's the most surprising part of this to me.
Dalton Connect completely changes Tennessee's ceiling. That is surprising to me.
That was the other one I was thinking about.
I'm certainly not surprised at this point, right? Yeah. We've seen it all season at this point. But one of the things that I had on my notes when we did the SEC preview was, am I going to be impressed by anybody in this conference on February 1st? Like, am I going to be truly impressed? Or is Tennessee going to kind of be the same thing that they always are? Is Arkansas's like kind of I don't even know. I don't even know which word. Is Arkansas like this combination of guards all over the place, but there's no Anthony Black, there's no Jordan Walsh. Like, Are they going to be good at anything, like really elite at anything, or am I just going to kind of be like, eh? I'm very about Arkansas. Kentucky, we talked about, like all these teams that could be the best team in the conference, that had a chance to be the best team in the conference. Was I going to be super impressed by them? I'm not totally sure I would say that I'm really, really impressed by Tennessee, but what has changed when it comes to Tennessee, and I specifically said, does Tennessee show me, this was on my notes, does Tennessee show me something offensively that they didn't have last year? Is Dalton Connect really going to change everything? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Dalton Connect really does change everything from the type of game that they can win in the NCAA tournament, from how high is their floor, from if all else fails, can Dalton Connect carry you to a round of 32 victory or a Sweet 16 victory? The answer to all of those questions is yes.
And just the way the teams have to guard them in general, too.
Sure. But sometimes their offense, just like, it doesn't matter if it's harder to guard them than it used to be. They still can't hit the broadside of a barn. But Connect absolutely changes all of those things. And I am surprised just how obvious it is at this point. Because I'm completely, like, if they lose a game in the NCAA tournament because they only score 53 points, like, I guess I won't be stunned because it's Tennessee, but I will be pretty surprised because I think right now what they're communicating is we can win in different ways, and we're going to make you score more than 56 points to beat us in the tournament.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. We talked about this. I'm very stubborn in terms of changing my tune about teams, hence what I said about the Pac-12 and being skeptical of the USCs and Oregons of the world. But when that thing happens, you have to identify it and you have to change your thinking. It was Virginia's offense when they won the national championship. It is Dalton Connect.
Yeah.
You cannot take this Tennessee team and compare them to Tennessee teams of years past, because they are fundamentally a different team and they are a more multidimensional, more versatile team that makes them harder to beat over an extended period of time. Maybe they are a little bit better. Maybe this is Rick Barnes' best team. It's probably not. Because the Admiral Schofield, Grant Williams team was awfully
the Grant
good
Williams
too.
Admiral Schofield team was awesome.
But which team is the most dangerous in March? Without a doubt, it's this one.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, the makeup of their roster and the way that they can win games has changed.
I can't begin to tell you how much I agree with you. I can't begin to tell you. Anything else in the SEC? Do we need to validate anything else that doesn't quite fit in any of these categories? Anything else before we get out of here?
The other thing I'll throw out there, we both just kind of went, this might be the year. St. Mary's is a top 15 team. And they need to be put into the category with the Dukes and Michigan States of the world in what is going on? How is this happening? How are they this much worse than everybody thought? Very disappointing so far. Maybe they pull it together. But this is still Gonzaga's conference, in case anybody was wondering.
Hey, maybe this is the they beat Colorado State on the road. Maybe this is the game that turns it around, but what we've seen through 10 games, I'd be surprised.
It could just take one and they have a really good conference showing, and they're one of those teams you don't want to play in March.
Yep.
But they got a lot of rebuilding trust to do to get to that point.
I'm just disappointed that the entire country isn't in love with Aiden Mahaney at this point. That's really what I'm sad about. Everybody's missing out on Aiden Mahaney because they're not any good. There's no reason to talk about him. So that's personal though. All right, Josh, anything else?
Looking forward to Saturday. We'll have a nice recap pod.
Yeah. It's gonna be good. It has the potential to be like the best Saturday until we get to like round of 32 Saturday of the entire regular season. Definitely has the potential to be the best regular season day of the entire year, but we shall see. We shall see for sure. And like Josh said, we will congregate to talk about that day mostly on Sunday. So that'll be another longer pod. And then Monday, we'll get back into the daily stuff as we get into the thick of conference play. So we will meet you back here on Wednesday. Excuse me, not Wednesday, on Sunday. And take care of yourselves. Until then, please subscribe to the James for Days podcast, the Under 8 podcast, on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. You can find all of those things several different places. We very much appreciate it if you would do that. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.